if you're not digitizing your operations in restaurants, then you're at a huge disadvantage. And I don't know if we would have said that as much 2 years ago, like with the explosion of AI, with the ability for you to connect data points across not just a few systems, but basically every system you run with. Even for an SMB, I think anyone who's not digitizing at least portions of that business, if not everything, is going to fall way behind.
Welcome to HR Tech Trailblazers. My name is Alex Kostecki. I'm one of the founders of Clair. And today I am really excited to have Brent Beatty on the podcast with us. Brent's known Clair since almost the very beginning. Brent is the VP of product of 7shifts. For those of you who don't know 7shifts, they are sort of one of the preeminent workforce management platforms, specifically specialized in the restaurant space. Their software covers about 1.5 million workers across the US and Canada, as well as 50,000 restaurants. And yeah, Brent, just really good to have you here. Maybe we could just start by getting like a quick overview of what 7shifts does from your part.
It's interesting. We've been going through a whole bunch of the rebrand is the wrong word, repositioning of 7shifts lately. So very top of mind. What we are a restaurant scheduling and payroll tool. So you mentioned workforce management, but kind of grand ambitions overall is for us to own every interaction between an employee and an employer within a restaurant in the future. So everything that we've already built in scheduling in the payroll space, but everything from hiring, training, anything that helps you engage your staff. So lots more work to do in the future. But yeah.
I think where you guys are really different to anybody in the space is just your sheer vertical focus. A lot of other players, like, I don't know, whether it's the humanities, when I work, Homebases of the world, have kind of taken that broad approach. And I think that it really shines through when we talk about product with you guys and how sort of laser focused you are with your restaurant manager as a target. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about how you've been, I think at 7shifts for like 8 years now, have seen that change your guys' positioning to compared to other folks and the advantage it's given you?
It was before my time that we decided to fire all of our other clients, and our founders actually have done a few talks across Canada, but different events about the moment we decided we had to fire 50% of the people using the platform. But from that moment on, I think what we realized is restaurants are unique. By going very deep into solving problems in a unique way for that use case, we were also able to grow really quickly and build a great network of partners that kind of fueled our early growth. And now what we're seeing kind of later on in our journey is that we're willing to go a little bit deeper. We talk a lot about focus on our teams, and if you're going wide for way too many people, you can't focus really deeply on driving the impact you want. And I think that's pretty eminent in our product right now. Like you can see that we've done a lot specifically for restaurants, and we've started to get into the unique use cases of quick serve versus full serve. And even in our partnerships specifically, it's just had a huge impact on our ability to grow and actually connect better with our audience.
I'm sure as VP of product, you're constantly talking to some of the restaurants you guys serve and kind of better understanding that angle. Can you give us a couple of examples of how unique a restaurant is in the SMB space, just in terms of like pure workflows, which are really difficult to design and maybe that you spent months and months thinking about over your nights and weekends to solve?
I think like in every pillar of that employee-employer interaction that I talked about, we go into, we kind of find out how that varies so differently by different restaurant type and size. A ton of examples exist within there, like scheduling your employees. Restaurants are different than everyone else. If you're working in retail, you're often scheduling people and they're showing up, but you're not scheduling people to business decline, or you're not actually matching demand, cutting people, sending people home, calling in people when you need them, right? So just like right at the start when we got into scheduling, we're like, this is way different in the restaurant space too. But then we kind of expanded out further than that. And you can see how that plays out in things like time and attendance, and how it plays out in terms of labor laws, and how restaurants either decide to apply them, and in some cases, maybe they don't. And then the further you go out, we've recently expanded more into the pay space. You look at things like tips and wages and how those things apply, using things like tip minimum wage, actually allocating and splitting tips across all the different people that work in restaurants. There's just a ton of variability and a ton of uniqueness there. And if we can build something that automates that, then the time savings that we can drive for a restaurant manager or an operator are just a lot bigger, or we can be a lot more impactful in that space than others. So,
are you seeing yourselves trying to educate restaurants on. I think we all remember our first jobs where a manager would text us the shift and then we'd show up and maybe like write it down on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And you guys are kind of showing up and telling them, hey, there's probably an app for that or some desktop software you should use. Is that a lot of what you're finding yourself doing in the go-to-market?
I think originally when I started at 7shifts, we quoted this stat. It was like only 20% of restaurants were using an app to schedule.
Mm.
And so that has played out over time. A lot more people now have adopted some type of technology to communicate pieces of the schedule, but we're doing that in a bunch of other areas now. Like a lot of restaurateurs we talk to are still running payroll in spreadsheets and have this massive thing they've designed over 2.5 years that they like run data through and pump a whole bunch of info into to spit out their tip allocation. And when you look at all the other areas of running a restaurant, like operations are rather lean. We work with a lot of SMBs that may have one GM and like a few people that are running the whole operation. And all of what they do is, I don't want to say offline, but not in an app, in Excel, in paper, sometimes in handbooks. Like it's just spread all over the place. And since we've kind of started, our big thing is trying to help people digitize that, move it into an area where it can be more effective, where their employees can access it, where it can be customized. And scheduling was the start of that, but we've just kind of continued that in all the areas of interaction that I mentioned earlier. So
right.
Yeah, I think pay was a more recent one, but when you look at how you train restaurant employees, how you communicate policy, like there's so much space within there for us to bring more of that into one place and make it easy.
I want to get to pay in a second, but one of the things that struck us when we started Clair is, we really believed in the interaction between all this extremely valuable data that people are creating about themselves on how they earn every day. And the idea that that isn't being used for financial services just seemed like a huge miss. And then, we started our market research and we saw like, well, okay, but that data is in text messages and spreadsheets and pieces of paper on the wall. And then we met you guys and you guys were telling us, no, we're trying to get all of this onto an app. And I think that was kind of a core part of our long-term vision in our company, to be honest. Do you feel like there's kind of a barrier, like maybe sort of single employee employers or are not going to adopt these products? Or do you feel like, really in the next 3 years, as in the last 3, we're going to see just an incremental number of people move everything onto these apps and desktops?
I don't know. I think we're at a point where if you're not digitizing your operations in restaurants, then you're at a huge disadvantage. And I don't know if we would have said that as much 2 years ago, like with the explosion of AI, with the ability for you to connect data points across not just a few systems, but basically every system you run with. Even for an SMB, I think anyone who's not digitizing at least portions of that business, if not everything, is going to fall way behind.
Mm-hmm.
And we're actually kind of doing some market research. Square had a really interesting release recently. I think it was like their 2025 State of the Industry report, but they were talking about how I think it was like 60% of restaurateurs are extremely excited about AI.
Mm-hmm.
And we've typically seen restaurant operators as tech averse. And I think a lot of people have, right? But there's definitely been a huge shift specifically in the restaurant industry where everyone now knows and kind of believes that if they're not making that jump or don't make it soon, that they'll be at a big disadvantage.
I imagine you guys are seeing that people are naturally turning to you guys for some of these sort of higher tech problems they're trying to solve with restaurants.
Yeah. I mean, before it was across POS and payroll or scheduling in POS, and that seemed like a big thing maybe 5 years ago. But now why can't you take all of your data points and look for new insights? And like, how can we make that available at scale for every small restaurant across North America, across the world, I guess. But that's kind of the next horizon I see, and that's moving quickly too.
So you mentioned pay earlier. We've obviously talked a lot about your guys' pay strategy over and over again. Could you maybe tell us sort of what pay means for 7shifts, just taking it from the very, very top?
So even when we started out, when we were a scheduling tool too, there's a big tie in there of employee time and attendance. And there's a massive overlap because for us, we weren't only trying to figure out when people should show up to work. We were helping businesses predict their demand and helping actually compare the plan that you built, which is a schedule. Even if people don't always see that as a plan, it is, right? And then what actually happened in the real world and how effectively your managers were running the floor or actually staffing and trying to meet demand. If you have a crazy day and you don't have enough people, you're leaving money on the table. And if you have 10 people there and you have to cut everyone early, you probably spend too much. So inherently, we were already kind of in pay before we knew that we were, because we were looking at time and attendance, which is very closely tied to the latter portion of that, which is actually getting money to your employees. For us, the pay space is about all of that. Like, how do we not just do the scheduling piece, but pair all the data we have there in scheduling with the data around who worked and when they worked, so that we can actually automate that system for restaurant managers so they don't have to care about, well, before, like paper sheets where people were writing what time they started and what time they left, but so they don't have to care about pay at all.
Right.
We're at the point now where operators within 7shifts are spending 5 minutes prepping payroll, and they're literally just cross-referencing some pieces of data. So pay for me is automating that piece. Like, I don't have to, as a manager, worry about when someone showed up, tracking all that data. There's a tool that does it for me, and that data is accurate, so we can ship it off super quickly at the end of that and make it easy.
And how do you think about the sort of employee side of the equation? As I think you guys have done an amazing job at just focusing on reducing minute by minute every single time investment and administration that a restaurant manager has. Is there a component that you think about on the employee side too?
Yeah, I'd say two things. The first, if restaurant managers have more time and more money, right? Time is money, but also we kind of help people with both. Those are our two key value props. Save managers time, save money that they don't need to spend, or help them spend less. We believe, and we work with restaurants that want to take those time and those cost savings and invest them back into their people and into their restaurants to actually make working in restaurants better for everyone.
Do you see that your employees become, or the employees of your customers become kind of your ideal advocates, or do you think that actually it's more of a restaurant manager focused thing?
Yeah, I guess what I forgot to mention there is I don't think we can serve managers without serving their employees too.
Right.
And we've always believed that if employees don't like us, then managers aren't going to keep us around.
Right.
Or they're going to be way more sticky if there's like a revolt from employees. You're like, no, you can't take away that app or that thing. And I actually worked at a restaurant that got 7shifts. I was actually still in university back in the day. And I remember us getting this app. I was like, this is great. Like,
this is before you worked there.
Before I worked there. It's like, I never want to work somewhere again that doesn't have this app.
Yeah.
And really it was like, I don't think I want to work in restaurants anymore either. I'm going to go work at 7shifts and do this tech thing. But I remember me having that feeling. And at that point, the app was literally just something that let you trade shifts and like send a message. And then we expanded it so much more after that. So that feeling for employees and them actually having one tool, not five, where they need to go, view all the data about work schedules, their time and attendance, payroll info, training, communication. If we can bring that together, then we'll create more big fans. And those fans aren't only managers and operators, they're employees too. And we hear that every day. / we get referrals from employees when they leave us. They go to a new office or new restaurant.
Yeah.
Why don't you have this? What do you have? Why don't you go use them? And
it's kind of refreshing to hear that perspective, because this sort of traditional HR tech space is more about just super strong sales motions, pushing software down people's throats and then just hoping it sticks.
Yeah.
And I think like we're seeing, especially some of the market leaders in this space, the folks that are just like grabbing a ton of market share like you guys are really focused on kind of the end-to-end experience. And, we're sort of obviously passionate about enabling that, but it explains the success.
We call it like team centricity, but it's a big pillar of who we are and how we build our product. Like early on in 7shifts, we built a product called Engage, and we looked at how we could leverage all of this info that we have about all the employees that work across the industry and within your restaurant, and serve that back to the employees themselves, but operators, to hopefully actually build more of like a cohesive group within the restaurant. And we want to be the platform that helps that group come together and communicate, and holds all that within our app too. So
yeah, for sure. Tell me a bit about the next sort of 2 to 3 years and what you're building, maybe starting with kind of the needs and the features you're really excited about delivering there.
Yeah, lots of new stuff. I kind of mentioned that pay has been our last like year or two. We've been investing pretty heavily in the tip management side of the world, which is really unique to restaurants, and payroll. Still more work to do there. Like we have a pretty solid product, but we're going to keep building on top of that. And I think restaurant tech in general is shifting. People are super excited about new technology, about AI. That's kind of how we're shifting focus in the short term, kind of reimagining what we've already built and how we serve operators' data, how we can augment them and make them more powerful and save them even more time and more money. Then I also mentioned all the other areas of interactions between employees and employers that we're diving into. So we've dipped our toes in a lot of areas over the years as we've kind of step laddered up to build a full platform. But I mentioned Engage, I mentioned training. how can we look at each of those pillars? We have 5, which is hire, train, schedule, pay, and retain. When we look at our full product and kind of reimagine what's possible within there and how does that actually fit SMBs and restaurants, but then all the different types of restaurants that we serve, quick serve, full serve, small unit coffee shops, franchises. So yeah, a lot of reimagining to do there. And I kind of foresee that within the next few years being the area we double down on and how we further deepen that value prop or the things that we provide our users, which is more time savings, more money back, and also employee retention, which is a huge piece or pillar of that team centricity that I
back to the initial
already.
Value prop. We have like a pretty strong thesis that, I mean, you've probably heard the adage that like every company is going to become a financial services company. I think like over and over you hear that. We obviously believe our role in that is really focused on the space you guys are in. Do you see 7shifts like fundamentally becoming, in big part a financial services company on top of everything else?
I mean, great question. I think where we see ourselves winning and kind of continuing to grow is actually owning the workflow. So like being the one place where a restaurant manager or operator or employee comes to get all the info and the things that they need. But we've worked with a lot of other providers that help make that possible. Clair is one of them, but there's others that help us with payroll and messaging. And so we kind of believe that, again, those interactions should be centralized, and we're more powerful when we pull in all the data and we pair that data together and provide operators with new insights. But the back end of all of that and how we provide those services are things that we're totally down to kind of assess and see whether or not that's something we want to build or we want to pair out. And more often than not, we're looking at tools like Clair that can help us move quickly, reduce risk, launch more in our product and add more to it and own that workflow, but not kind of take on the whole lift of building everything in-house. So.
And how do you think, like maybe specifically as a head of product, about the lines you don't want to be crossing when you're doing that build versus partner decision?
Yeah. So again, we come back in my mind just to how we provide the best experience possible for operators and employees while expanding horizontally and bringing more into the system. And there's just like a constant balancing act there, right? Like the more that we're spending and building back end to offer earned wage access, if we were, the less time we have to automate more of the front end and invest in AI within payroll and other areas.
If your users actually like it.
Yeah. So yeah, I think over the past few years, we've played around with that line and moved the line here and there. And, we've built certain products in-house, we've partnered some out, and ultimately it always came back to us to be like, how do we move quickest? How do we reduce our own risk? And how do we own the front end and that experience that kind of centralizes everything for operators and for employees? Because we talked to a lot of restaurant operators. I think it was on with like 10 last week. And the number one thing they said is, I just want one place for my employees to go to and for me to go to do all these things. And everyone's trying to be an all-in-one something. Like you look at a Toast or Square or others, and they're all-in-one for a lot of things, but we're all-in-one for those employee and employer interactions. And we think by focusing there and looking at like, what are we building versus buying, and how can we bring all that into one area and really build the best workflow and experience that's where we'll win. So.
One thing that I found really interesting since sort of the moment we started working together was 7shifts' focus on tips. So when you guys started working on this and we knew each other, you didn't have a payroll product. You weren't really like, managing much beyond sort of that initial tips pooling product that you had. And I believe at the time you were really just more focused on that sort of scheduling and time and attendance workflow and that management efficiency workflow, which you guys obviously executed on really well. And I think you guys were the only one in the space that I knew that just like saw that problem and were like, we want to fix that. That is such a huge, big part of like restaurant management. And we want to handle that. And whether someone else is helping us or not, we don't care. Like we just need to get it done.
Yeah.
Why? Well, like what happened there? And then, we'd love to hear a little bit more of what you think is happening in the tip space.
Yeah. So when I started at 7shifts, most people were still coming into our tool and were fumbling around with emails and Excel spreadsheets and text messages. And I remember at one point in our app, we're like, just send us your Excel and we'll like build it for you.
Right.
And that took off. As soon as we did that, they're like, great, just like get me on it, get me set up. And then when we got into time and attendance, it was a really similar thing. They're like, okay, well, we still talked to restaurants in 2022 that had people writing down their time cards, which was wild in my mind. If you want to figure out how you're actually allocating and distributing tips in states with tip credit rates and different minimum wages, like fumbling all of that and basically mashing it all together was a process that every restaurant operator hated, was one that no one was doing well, and one that seems really easy to pull together and digitize in that way too. And tips was a huge part of that, and the one that every restaurant fumbled with the most. So after talking to all of them, like, yes, time and attendance was hard, but taking time and attendance, adding all of the compliance and regulatory fees and things you needed to consider, then applying all the like PTO and like state-based legislation, and then adding tips on top of that.
Right.
Where with tips, you were referencing all that other info.
The initial hours that someone had put in and how that split up the pool. Yeah.
So yeah, I remember meeting with some people and I'm like, walk me through how you do this. And it was like 8 hours of work every week just to finish it. And I'm like, how is this sustainable? And one like really interesting thing about restaurants is how resourceful they are. So they'll find a way to get it done, and they'll build their spreadsheet that connects to another one, and they'll alter the data themselves and just do it and kind of strong arm their way through. But I'm like, they shouldn't have to, and this should be easy. And that's how we kind of first identified the tips problem, and how it was so apparent that with the right data and the right connections within our app, we could automate all that and hopefully make it easy.
Can you maybe give us the sort of other perspective, the employee perspective of, these restaurant managers could have just said, listen, you're all going to get paid more, but hourly, and I'm not dealing with this anymore. And we're just like, we're not doing the tips thing, but they're not. Like, we've seen some restaurants try, we've seen them in New York, including one of your investors' restaurants, and didn't happen. It's like, why is it so important that that just continues existing?
A lot of people are anti-tips or have certain feelings about it.
Yeah.
Mostly consumers, right? They're like, oh
any tourist
everyone's
from Europe
asking me for it. Yeah. But it's kind of embedded into the fabric of the whole industry overall, right? Like, one, we attract people at different stages of life, and they're actually looking to make good money. And they know if they provide great service and put in the extra work, that compensation will come, and it's variable. And what happened in a lot of restaurants is, if you're full service, someone in the front of house would write their name down on an envelope and like enter all their details and send a cash out receipt, and all the money would get thrown in there. And maybe a week later you get a little envelope with cash. And we had some servers who were writing that info and the actual amount down every week, and then going back to their manager and being like, no, you messed this up. It's wrong. Like, I don't trust that number. How did you get to it? So inherently there isn't as much trust between employees and employers. And one of the big opportunities we saw in tips was to increase transparency there and actually have all that data in more real time, and at the end of your shift, and then eventually pay that data out.
Really interesting. And I think that is something that you guys leaned into more than anywhere else in the space. Like, Clair's approach, typically, in the products we launched together, we obviously benefited from being able to use the time and attendance data, but even there we were making estimations based on gross wages. And you guys in the tips problem went really, really deep on getting that very, very precise number for the employee. What did you see with employees in terms of, being able to receive funds through the tip solution, how that changed literally their lives and also their relationship with their employer and also your software?
I think with tips, it was almost an expectation for a lot of employees, right? Like, you would pick up an extra shift that day because you assumed that you'd leave with some cash, and then you could take that and maybe go out that night. I don't know. It depends on the employee too. What we saw was actually the bigger shift from restaurant managers away from wanting to have cash on hand, from collecting cash. So a lot of them were coming and they're like, listen, like, I need to pay my employees that day, / they expect to get paid then. And I don't really have a mechanism to do that as much anymore, right? Like, there were some people that were calling armored calls to deliver cash to their restaurant just so they could pay that cash out to their employees. That just seemed so unmanageable. And you pay a lot of money for that stuff too.
Yeah.
So it was pretty obvious for us, the value for an operator there. It was like, yeah, you should just use our tool. It will make it so much easier. And then the value for employees, which was, well, I want my money, and that's changing and shifting. And how do we kind of connect the two? So yeah, I think there was a lot of impact from that feature being offered. And it's probably similar to everything in the earned wage space, right? Like, people are more likely to show up and pick up shifts, and they value the transparency, and their life changes. And these are hourly workers that often need access to the money and those things sooner. So I think tips and earned wage access in that way are pretty similar.
Yeah.
Just people's expectations or thoughts around how they got their tip money, how it was allocated, and all of that is a little more complex and definitely more specific to restaurants too, which made it a good problem for us to dive into.
For sure. we're also seeing most of the behavior around earned wage access is literally just reallocating money to where your bills actually are, right? So like within a given month, first pay cycle in the first 2 weeks, to simplify, you're getting hit with your rent, your electricity bill, your car payment, whatever it is. And we literally, saw this in some of the first products we launched together, where like the paycheck would come in and it was immediately depleted. That was such a huge piece of value and opportunity that we pull straight out of what we had designed together with like the time and attendance data and just like that kind of really exciting set of data. Do you see other places where sort of, the data you guys are holding every day about employees and trying to could make available for different features, could solve just like massive problems like that, whether it's for the employee or the employer?
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how we've tried to build our app, to be the hub of all the data and information about employees. And I think the more you can pair all that info together, the more you get a lot of insights in all 5 pillars that we work in, but in a bunch of new areas too. So we've talked about employee engagement and actually diving into that piece. And that's one area that we invested in really early on. Like, how do all these signals and things that your employees are doing help you understand if they're happy?
Yeah.
Or if you're going to retain them?
Yeah. What are like just interesting pieces of data you saw coming out of those use cases, for example? Like, how the hell do you know if a team is happy or if they're more productive?
Well, yeah, the interesting thing we found was the number one predictor of whether or not employees had a good day was whether you built a good schedule or not. Because if there were too many people, they were bored. And if there weren't enough people, they were dying.
Oh my God.
So it was a good tie back there to be like, oh, look, we actually really impact this or change it. I mean, that was like a really interesting finding early on in that product. I'm like, if you mess that up, everything fails after.
Right.
And then often you do too, because again, you left money on the table or you were inefficient because you paid too many people and didn't need them there. So I think like predicting demand was kind of the first foray, but there's so much more we can do there by pairing together data around your employees, info about the guest experience, pulling that back into things that you as a manager should action. So when these people work, if food quality is lower, maybe you want to retrain your staff or, like push something out to them to help get them back in line. And maybe you can pair back the info about how well the last shift went to all the people that are actually working that day or the managers that are leading the shift to help like run a more efficient operation. So I think there's a ton of opportunity there. We're actually just starting to kind of scratch the surface on how we bring all those things together. But when we do, and when we enable that for small restaurants, because I think at scale, a lot of other operations have invested more time and money into figuring out how those things fit together, but SMBs haven't, and that's what we want to enable for them. So.
Yeah. You guys want to be the place for everything. You have a ton of data. You're starting to bring together a lot of partnerships, and I think have like created so much momentum around the value you can bring one sort of restaurant manager. How do you not become a shopping mall with a million buttons everywhere and sort of too many services offered that are distracting to the restaurant manager?
Yeah, I think again with focus, right? So we can't be everything to everyone. And I talked about everyone being all in one in some regard. And there are some people, like a lot of POS partners, who are trying to be all in one in every single thing that your restaurant will do. And I think all the power to them, but they're not going to go as deep as I mentioned. And they're going to offer a lot of things that they don't do very well. And for some operators, that's fine. And for others, it won't be. So I think in our mind, what we're really focusing on there is figuring out how we are all in one for the employee-employer piece, but how we play in the spaces where we can have most impact. And honestly, just how we keep that simple and really tailor what we show in the UI and how we present our experiences and build the product to each of those individual use cases. And I think there's a ton of examples of a bunch of apps out there that as they've grown and maybe the type of employee or the type of business that they go after has also changed or shifted, they kind of lost their way. They've lost simplicity, they added complexity, and we've been really cognizant about figuring out how to not do that.
Well, what's one thing that you've said no to?
I would say we've tried a lot of things in a bunch of different areas to see what took off or what impacted operators overall. But I mean, like building in-house, I think earned wage access was one of the early things that we also decided wasn't for us. But we've dove into hiring in different areas or facets of that. And we haven't said no forever, but no right now to certain pieces of it. Like, what do we want to bring in the platform and what can someone go somewhere else and do really well and just push or integrate into ours? I would just like give a good plug to Clair too. Like, I think we do believe that our future is being the one place to facilitate all these interactions and to bring it all together. And our strategy has been to look at what things we want to build in-house and what we don't. And I think apps like yours and many others that we work with can help us scale really quickly and focus on the right things. So
excited for us to build more stuff together. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining, and we'll see you hopefully in the Clair offices pretty soon.
Yeah.